Thank you very much. It's a real honor and privilege to be here representing the work of dozens of brilliant scientists, engineers, clinicians. I know the topic of this talk was total cardiac replacement. Are we there yet? And the answer is, I don't know. But I think perhaps the Bivacor is the world's first permanent heart replacement device. Our early results are beyond encouraging. I'm going to tell you where we've been. Is that better? I'm going to tell you where we've been and where we are now and where we think we're headed. This is my disclosure. I'll try to maintain equipoise, listen with the appropriate filters in place. Everybody in this room knows heart failure is a big deal. Why don't we transplant everybody? Because there's a limited number of transplants. We need an artificial heart. And pretty much a lot of people have given up on the notion. Where was the first artificial heart in the world implanted? Here, Houston, yeah. Michael DeBakey and his then partner Denton Cooley were doing tons of heart surgery. Dr. DeBakey had worked on this device with Domingo Loyola and had implanted it in about 7 or 8 cows. And while he was in Washington, D.C. getting additional funding, Denton Cooley, who'd never gone to the animal lab, never messed with it at all, put it in a patient. Dr. DeBakey came back in town, was very congratulatory. He said, nice work. No, not really. And that started a 40-year feud. They didn't talk to each other. DeBakey was immediately fired, Denton Cooley, and all the people in the lab. They went across, and the Texas Heart Institute had been founded in 1962, but that's where they all went for refuge. And even though the centers were across the parking lot from each other, these two great men didn't speak for the next 40 years. And throughout the 80s, they did more heart surgery than was done in all of Europe. That original heart was implanted in this gravely ill patient, Haskell Karp, and worked for about 64 hours, but he started hemolyzing because of the valves they put in. He was going into renal failure. They quickly did a transplant. This is long before cyclosporin. 32 hours later, the patient, Haskell Karp, tragically died of sepsis. So 4 days after the operation, he died. And so not a great victory, but it was the first artificial heart in a patient. And that device is enshrined in the Smithsonian Institute. You can go to Washington, D.C. and see it, but its descendants are still with us today. And they all work kind of the same. There are 2 flexible chambers or flexible diaphragms, and either compressed air or silicone oil or a pusher plate compresses them, causing them to eject. It then backs off and they refill. 2 one-way valves turn it into forward motion. This is a great way to pump blood for short periods of time, but it's tragically flawed. Why? If it's doing that 100 times a minute, that's 144,000 times every day. It's 52 million times a year. No man-made device can do that without failing, and that's been borne out over the last 70 years. All the devices that use that mechanism have been good short-term or okay short-term hemodynamic support, but they fail capriciously at a year, year and a half, 2 years. So they're all bridge to transplant. That very device reemerged as the Jarvik 7. It then was called the Symbian, then the CardioWest. It's now called the Syncardia Temporary Total Artificial Heart. You know, we put a handful of them in at the Texas Heart Institute. All those different versions, about 2,000 have been implanted. About 70% of patients have either been transplanted or still alive on the device, but it has unknown durability, like I just described. And so the average time it's in the chest is 90 days. It doesn't change the number of patients you can save. It just keeps some patients alive until you can find a donor heart and transplant them. That notwithstanding, it's the only artificial heart that's ever been approved in the United States. In the late 90s, Abiomed of Impella fame tried to say, we can make a better artificial heart. They spent $250 million developing this. No external driver. Instead of compressed air, it used silicone. Bud Frazier and the guys at Louisville put this in about 300 animals. 150 were done at the Texas Heart Institute. And then 14 patients were implanted. Dr. Frazier did 5 of them. But no patient lived longer than 9 months. Only 4 of the patients lived longer than 9 months, and all 4 of them died when their devices failed. The longest one went 17 months. So after spending $250 million in 2002, Abiomed gave up. This kind of durability 52 million heartbeats a year is just too demanding. It's why we don't have airplanes with flapping wings. So this device is gone. There's another device out there now, the CarMat. Have any of you heard of that? They've actually put it in 97 patients. I heard Michael Mack give an update last week on it. I wish them well. And it may very well be the most sophisticated and coolest airplane with flapping wings, but we need a better airplane. So a lot of people got disillusioned at total artificial heart efforts and shifted away and started working on LVADs. And Bud Frazier at the Texas Heart Institute was one of the leaders of that sea change and developed the XVE and did the first 25 of them before they did one at Columbia Presbyterian. Isn't that true? The rematch trial showed that this big device could keep patients alive better than medical therapy while you're waiting for a transplant. But if you didn't get a transplant and your device failed at a year and a half, you would die. In fact, only 25% of the patients were alive at 2 years. But that was much better than medical therapy. It was a big device. It consumed a lot of power and had limited durability. But it showed us pumps could save lives. And that's what Rich Wampler and Rob Jarvik were thinking when they developed the first spinning pumps. How many of you ever taken care of a patient with a pulsatile LVAD? Probably none of it, or very few of you. They're all spinning now. And there are tons of different spinning pumps. This is the HeartMate 2. It was the first commercially successful one. Only one moving part. It's suspended on 2 synthetic gemstone bearings. They last much longer. And the first successful one, again, was done by Bud Frazier, the Texas Heart Institute, in November of 2003, right after I came back down from Boston. And I didn't have my Houston tickets yet, so I had to watch from the head of the bed while he and Igor put it in. But much smaller, but more importantly, more durable. There's a patient now who's, I think, 22 years out, and you told me the other day 500 patients that are 15 years out. Super durable and obsolete because we have better ones now. Now, there are tons of pumps. And by the way, most of the ones in this picture are obsolete. There's 20 new ones. They're maglev. The one moving part is floating in a magnetic field. Well, Bud said, hey, we really need to invent a new artificial heart. He came up with the idea of taking these turbines, any of them, all of them, and trying to make an artificial heart out of it. And so we cobbled them together, went to the animal lab, did 68 animals over an 8.5-year period, culminating in this device. The HeartMate 2 got approved in 2010. So 2011, Bud said, let's go for it. We found a gravely ill patient with systemic amyloid. We cut out his heart. This is the first human being with a continuous flow total artificial heart. He came off bypass fine. He was extubated a couple days later. You see how icteric he is. He's on dialysis, but the world's first continuous flow human. We got a lot of lay press. Tragically, after about 5 weeks, his liver function got so bad he couldn't stay awake. The family asked that we turn the device off, but it functioned flawlessly. We got to give a TED talk, and we were on the cover of Popular Science and National Geographic. The most important thing that came out of that is we met this young man, this brilliant young man, Daniel Timms, whose father was dying of heart failure. And while he was, Daniel dedicated his PhD thesis to developing a continuous flow artificial heart. He didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what he was doing. And we got all this exposure from putting it in this patient. He came to the United States with a bunch of crap in a backpack on his own dime and showed Bud and I, and we looked at each other and said, this is so much cooler than what we're doing. We said, where's your team? He said, well, I got 2 guys in Brisbane and 2 guys in Auckland, a guy in South America, 2 guys in Japan. We said, how much would it cost to bring them all here? He said, $2.5 million. We knocked on one door. Mattress Mac wrote us a check. We brought him here. And within a year and a half, working in the basement of the Texas Heart Institute, we generated the first prototype of this. It was a plastic printed device, but it looked a lot like this. It had a single moving part, a double-sided impeller. This pinwheel pumps the red blood returning from the lungs out to the 30 trillion cells in your body. This little Stonehenge thing takes the venous blood from your arms and legs and pumps it through your lungs. And that one spinning thing is suspended in an electromagnetic field that's changing several thousand times a second by an outside computer, so there's no mechanical wear. It'll never wear out. No flexible membranes, no flapping wings, no valves. Those are the magnets that keep it levitated. It's advanced dramatically since then with just an amazing effort by the engineers that we've brought in to Team Bivacor, and by this team that Dr. Frazier's built at the Texas Heart Institute. How many of you have ever been down to B2, the sub-basement of the Texas Heart Institute? Man, it is hallowed ground. Just an amazing team of brilliant folks. That's Gil Costas, our veterinarian. There's Daniel. There's Kelly, who rides with the animals as we come out of the OR. It takes this kind of army of brilliant people to do this, and after those first 68 animals, we did 40 or so with the Bivacor, culminating in some great experiments and some great outcomes. Here's an animal at 3 months walking on a treadmill with a Bivacor where his heart used to be. We learned that we could spin the rotor fast and slow and make a pulse if we wanted to, and now we think we want to. We've froze our design in 2021, had some great conversations with the FDA. They said, we want to see 5 30-day animals in a row. Here they are. It's hard to get these animals to survive. They're lying in their own poop with a drive line and central lines. Infections are a big problem. But again, with that team, we were able to get that done. We were able to present that data. They pushed back on some stuff. We went back and forth, culminating. And here's our durability. We have 8 pumps that have been going for over 2.5 years, and 2 of an earlier iteration that have been going for 5 years. Presented all that to the FDA. Our hemolysis data, our device pumping 12 liters a minute is about like a HeartMate 3 doing 5. So great hemolysis data. This is what the device looks like now. There's a little back thing, satchel you have to carry, but that's going to get smaller and smaller and disappear. There's a screen you can plug it in at night, like a HeartMate 3. And you can see it gets smaller in the middle, and on the third panel, we get rid of it altogether, power the thing by inductive coupling, don't have a drive line because we can do 7 liters a minute on both sides for 7 watts all day long. Based on this, the FDA said on November 17th, 2023, we were at the Las Vegas F1 when we got the news. What a celebration, that we were approved to do 5 EFS patients in the United States. These are gravely ill patients awaiting transplant that were not expected to survive long enough to get their transplant. We would take them to the OR, take out their bad heart, put the Bivacor in if they survived the operation and if they got over the operative stress and did well enough that they could be relisted. We would try to transplant them. They would stay in the ICU because of our drive line. These are the 9 sites that we started with. We activated 4 of them, and doing this activation is a Herculean task. Getting the clinical trial agreement, the insurance in place, training all the surgeons, the anesthesiologists, the critical care docs, the nurses. It's a monster task. Alexis came down. Where is Alexis? Oh, Alexis came down and did 8 or 10 animals with me, acute animals as part of the training. Bud was always there. These surgeons would fly down, we'd do animals, we'd go do human cadavers, we'd go to their program and train 100 people at each program, culminating all through June of last year, that around July we said we're ready to go. Here's the first patient. Alexis sewed it in flawlessly, 57-year-old male. He got his breathing tube out on day 4. He was up in a chair on day 5. He was walking on day 7. There was some chaos, a little bit, differences in opinion about how the patient should be managed, but ultimately he did great, was walking in the hall, got listed for transplant, got transplanted at day 8. He's home with his family. Second patient at Duke. Now we were a little bit smarter. We knew how to manage the patients. He got extubated on post-op day 1. By post-op day 8, he was walking almost a mile a day with the Bivacor heart. He got transplanted on post-op day 10. He's home with his family. Third patient in Banner, 6'4", 240 pounds, type O. Took us a while to find a heart. 27 days before he found a donor organ. He was transplanted on day 28. He was walking a mile or 2 with a cardiac output of close to 14 liters a minute with this device in place. Fourth patient, closest we came to a disaster. He did great. Day 16, we transplanted him. primary graft dysfunction, came out of the OR on ECMO with an open chest. His donor heart gradually improved. We got him off ECMO, closed his chest. He was on dialysis for a couple months. Now he's home. Great video of him waiting in line at McDonald's and getting an Egg McMuffin with a Bivacor in place. And then our last patient, also at Texas Heart. We submitted this data to the FDA to see if we could do some more. While they were weighing and opining on it, we went to Australia, to St. Vincent's in Sydney with Paul Jantz. Sewed one into a patient right before Thanksgiving. They don't do a lot of heart transplants in Australia. He still got his Bivacor. Today's day 78, and he's home and independent with no nurse, changing his own batteries, just like a HeartMate 3 patient with a cardiac output that goes up to 14 liters a minute when he goes to the grocery store. We just got the nod from the FDA to do 15 more EFS here in the United States, and they told us our EFS patients will count toward our pivotal. This is a chest x-ray of a patient with a pump in place, and it still gives me a thrill looking at this after 20 years of slogging away surrounded by cow poop. Here's a patient doing his 6-minute walk 8 days after having his Bivacor implanted. This guy was on his deathbed with an Impella 5.5. Oh, I should tell you, all these patients have Impella 5.5s and are dying despite of it because of right heart failure. Here I said, how you doing? He goes, yeah, not bad. He did a 420-meter 6-minute walk on day 8 after his Bivacor implantation. Here's what's really cool. When we transplanted that patient on day 27, 28, here's what it looks like on the inside of the pump. Looks brand new. We don't think you need to be on Coumadin. Bud, did these patients need to be on Coumadin? Yeah, see, there you go. Anyway, here's our first patient with our board and drinking. We have a long way to go, but our early results, like I said, are beyond encouraging. We just got approved to do 15 more. If this isn't the world's first permanent artificial heart, it's only because somebody else comes and makes something very similar to it and dupes us, and we're going to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Anyway, thank you very much. I know I'm already over time. Can I show one more quick slide? Is that all right? So, Bud and I both trained with DeBakey. We both worked at the Texas Heart Institute with Dr. Cooley. Black ants, red ants. We would go over and tell Dr. DeBakey what we were working on. He'd say, well, see, it's very satisfying seeing you working on this. I thought of this years ago. You know, the hallmark of a good idea. And we would invite him to come over, and he'd say, well, I'll talk to Hitty Benny. He never came over. Well, Bud did some groundwork, apparently got the deal done. I'm down in the OR, getting the animal ready. Somebody says, Billy, it's George Noon. George Noon, prominent surgeon. I go, yeah, George. He goes, hey, Billy, Dr. DeBakey's coming over in the tunnel. I went, whoa. I called Bud. He goes, oh, yeah, all right. Well, I'm going to call the boss. He calls Denton Cooley. His son had his cell phone and snapped this picture. There's Mateus Lobe, the late, great Mateus Lobe. Here's me putting the pump in. Here's Bud Frazier getting in my way. Sorry. Here's George Noon. Here's Michael DeBakey and Denton Cooley sitting down like they're best pals after 40 years of not speaking to each other. Shortly after that, Dr. Cooley invited DeBakey to join the Cooley Society. DeBakey invited Cooley to join the DeBakey Society. DeBakey was notified he got the Congressional Gold Medal, and he took Cooley with him to Washington, D.C. So this device not only has the potential to cure heart failure, it can mend badly fractured relationships. Thank you.